All right, this week is a new week, March 27th in our class, and the focus this week and today is on universal design for learning applied. So you'll have a chance to apply your knowledge of universal design for learning in this week's activities for sure. But first we have a tech talk presented to us by Michaela, and she's created one about Kahoot and actually shown an example of her class using Kahoot in the classroom, and it's a great tool to be aware of. So if you're not familiar with Kahoot, this is one to really try out if you have a chance to. But watch that presentation from her and the information sheet and recipe sheet that she has provided with that as well to teach you about Kahoot. So the readings for this week go to different universal design for learning principles. There's principles 1, 2, and 3, and I will talk about these a little bit more in depth. There's a lot of information on here, so I'm going to try to simplify it for you a little bit later in this presentation. Yeah, they have different principles, and then if you want to open up the checkpoints and just have a look at what those talk about for each of the 3 principles, there's quite a lot of information, so I'm going to try to boil it down for you in this video, like I said, in a minute. But that's what you're learning about this week, is this universal design applied, or this universal design idea. And then we think about, when we're thinking about providing ways for our students, different ways for our students to access our material, almost all the time this idea of learning styles comes up. And teachers often will say, well, I have a lot of students in my class. Some of them are visual learners, some of them are auditory learners, some of them are kinesthetic learners. You've probably heard things like that if you're a teacher in the classroom. So be aware of this kind of way of thinking, though, and the reason is that you should be aware of that kind of thinking is that there's research that doesn't back it up so well, and that's why this video is here, is that you can watch this video and it will tell you about the research and some of the common sense ideas that have been thrown out of the water, or thrown out, I guess, because of this concept of learning styles. So anytime we start thinking about how can we reach our students in different ways, learning styles usually comes up, but sometimes learning styles can be a myth. And so watch the video on that. It's kind of an interesting one from Dan Willingham. And then there's an additional video here that adds some other thoughts to that video that you'll watch as well, from Professor Willingham, a cognitive psychologist, and I think you'll find it pretty enlightening. But it basically boils down to the fact that learning styles are not necessarily correct in what they predict. And so you have to be careful about saying, well, my auditory learners must always learn auditorially, or my visual learners must always learn visually. They will always learn best that way. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And so that's something to look at. All right, and if we go to the last part of this week's activities, we have the Universal Design for Learning Plan. This is the assignment that I talked to you about in last week's video, where you will actually submit an old, original, unchanged lesson plan and then an updated lesson plan with Universal Design for Learning principles within that plan, and a technology component that supports those Universal Design for Learning principles. So if you have any questions about that, let me know. I did present about it in past week's video, though, so you can still look that up from the last week. The reflection, again, is required as well, so that means you want to implement it in the classroom. And again, I'm going to be flexible on that. If there's a teacher who says, well, I would like to do this lesson, but it's not due, I'm not going to teach this lesson for a few weeks in my class, that's okay. Let me know, and then we can work it out to make it work for you. So that's the plan. There are alternative assignments too, as you remember, if you don't have your own class to teach this in, or access to a classroom to teach this lesson, which some of you don't, then you can, instead of the reflection, look up a few sources on Universal Design for Learning, and then write about what those sources said about Universal Design for Learning in addition to the lesson plans that you submit. And then finally, if you aren't ever planning on teaching a class, or if you're an administrator, it would be useful to do a literature review, about 5 to 7 sources, that you read those sources and then write to me what the benefits of Universal Design for Learning are based on those sources, and citing those sources well in your literature review. So those are the alternatives for this assignment that is due by the end of this week. So as promised, I wanted to talk about Universal Design for Learning a little bit and give you a simple overview of these guidelines. If you look at this language right here, this is actually a Bible, and it's written in the Korean language, which is a pretty rare language. If you were to encounter this language and try to read this Bible, you'd probably wish for the material to be presented to you in multiple different ways so that you could engage with the material a little bit better. Say in English might be one of those ways that you might expect to have happen. Universal Design for Learning is all about this. It's about presenting materials in providing ways for students to engage with those materials in multiple different ways and using technology to allow us to do this. So these are the three principles, the three major principles for Universal Design for Learning, which is to provide multiple means of representation, provide multiple means of action and expression, and provide multiple means of engagement. A good, easy way to think about these is the first one, representation, is you teaching to the students or materials that students learn from. Representation meaning that the students are going to engage with this material or read from this material. The second one, action and expression, those are ways that students can express the information back to you or engage with the information in an active way on their own. So you want to provide multiple ways first for students to be able to view or listen to or watch or engage with the material that is being taught to them. And then the second one, students need to be able to act or express themselves in multiple ways as well. And then the last one is engagement, and that just means motivation. So provide multiple means of motivation or helping students to become motivated into your lesson plan. So your lesson plan that's required this week will require you to do at least two of these, whether it's representation and then also action and expression, or whether it's engagement and representation, or whatever. So if we look at representation, for instance, if you look at this paper, here's an example of an IKEA, how to put your furniture together. A lot of people don't really like these, right? Because there are no words to them. But the fact that they haven't included words is kind of a nice way to reach multiple audiences, right? Multiple languages. Although, again, that's maybe not the best example. This is another thought to have, is when students actually engage with something. A student who doesn't have very good eyesight needs some kind of other way to engage with a material than students who do. And another example is this, this is an interesting kind of a walking path here with Braille on the side of it. Another example is Visu words, which gives students just kind of another way to engage with the material that they've been working on. I have to look that one up actually. So here's Visu words. You can find a word and it kind of, you can do a search for any kind of word, like synonym, and it kind of visually connects that word with other words in this visual format. So this is another way for students maybe to learn about a word, is to visualize it in this different way. Universal Design for Learning would tell us if we're trying to teach students the meaning of a concept, let's say that concept is the concept of a synonym, then we could provide them with different ways to do so. Maybe we could present about it. Maybe we could also send them to Visu words and see what it looks like on here. And then maybe there's also a video that we could show them about it. That would be multiple means of representation, because that's what's teaching the student, the representation. And then going back here, we have different multiple means of action and expression. I'm going quickly through this because I want to show you the examples. So here's an example with a tennis ball. The action and expression that students have here is on the interactive whiteboard, but they have options for doing this in different ways. They could use their finger, but they could also use this tennis ball to move things around. It provides them with multiple options for doing so, especially for students who, again, might have a disability or special needs. Another way for students to be able to express themselves or to show that their knowledge is this infographic, or the concept of an infographic, where there is information and graphics combined in a nice way. So students could create an infographic as one of their, choices for the assignment that you have them do. And that's a different way of for them to submit their work back to you. And then multiple means of engagement. You want to engage student in different ways. In fact, there's this interesting NBC Olympics web page from the Winter Olympics back in 2014 that helps students to engage in the science and engineering topics using an engaging idea of the Olympics, right? A lot of people really like the Olympics, and it can be engaging to watch athletes do what they do. But then we allow them to learn about science and engineering using this engaging framework. So this is one way of engaging students. You might provide another way to engage students in this concept as well, learning about science and engineering. Maybe stability and vibration. You also have an actual small vehicle that you try out in your class, and that's another way, another way to allow students to engage in this engineering idea. So technology can help us do these things in many ways, and the examples that I shared are that way as well. So that's kind of a brief introduction, but again, just going back there's multiple means of representation is the first one. And that means that you represent the information in multiple ways to students. And so you might have one way you introduce it by yourself as a teacher, but then you might have a technology-supported way to introduce the concept as well in a little bit different way to help them to engage in the materials, such as maybe a YouTube video or an interactive multimedia experience or a tutorial. And then the second one is to provide multiple means of action and expression, meaning that when students have learned the concept, they need to be able to be tested on that. They need to be able to show you that they know the concept. And so you're going to provide them multiple means to do that as well. Maybe there's a different way to have them express themselves in their work. A good example, again, is a tool called Story Jumper or Storybird. And students can create a storybook to represent their knowledge instead of just filling out a multiple choice test on the knowledge. So there's multiple means of doing that. They can create a storybook, or maybe they can create a podcast. And technology supports those means. And then finally, means of engagement, meaning different ways to engage student in the material and motivate them for completing it. And another example of that might be to have dinosaurs as an example if you know that there are students in your class that really like dinosaurs. Or if there is someone who's interested in the Olympics as in the example, they can learn the subject while thinking about Olympics as the example of it. So those are the three areas. Most people focus on the first two, representation and action and expression. And that's how they usually do this assignment. Well, I think that's about all in this presentation today. Thanks for listening, and have a great week, and good luck on the assignments.